Celine is a story of three people. It's a story of a man and two women and the bonds that develop between them. It's fundamentally a story of what happens when a man who is very intelligent in many ways, very sophisticated about the world, meets the ultimate femme fatale. The femme fatale is probably one of the oldest archetypes in known history. The first femme fatale that we know about is Helen of Troy. I mean, we have a 10-year battle based on Helen of Troy. There's Delilah, and of course, more recently, we have all the femme fatales from the film noir movies of the 40s and 50s, like Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity or Kathleen Turner in Body Heat. So it's an old archetype. So this is just sort of a reinvention of that kind of person who I think is absolutely fascinating, has been such an important part of literature for so long. Well, I'm fascinated by the power that certain things have to change the course of people's lives or to even change history. And one of the things that's so powerful is the power of beauty. Celine, the main character, is an exceptionally beautiful woman. In fact, I call her a hauntingly beautiful woman. And a woman becomes hauntingly beautiful not only because of the way she looks, but because there's something inside of her that you want to know, but you can't. It's just impossible to really reach her. We find out something about her, but the main character, even though he finds out information about her, something about how she grew up, how she became the person, there's still some core of mystery which is always there. The story is that Celine and Alexa, who are the two women, are agents of an international criminal syndicate. And what they do is they steal very high-valued works of art. And they've been doing it for 10 years. So Celine realizes in an operation that they have to do in Switzerland that they need somebody who they might have to leave behind. And by leave behind, I mean at room temperature. And she goes on to one of the dating services and finds Prez. They meet, and Prez is immediately beguiled by Celine and almost helpless in her hands. She's such an expert, and she's been doing this for so long that she just knows how to wrap men around her fingers. So that's the way he meets Celine. At one point, he meets Alexa, and what happens is, in a very funny, emotional way, he sees the relationship between Celine and Alexa. He never becomes emotionally involved himself with Alexa, but he accepts the relationship between Celine and Alexa. Why? Because he's fallen in love with Celine, and anything that's part of Celine, he accepts. I wanted to make sure that the reader had a good picture of that erotic element. And the reason is very simple. Celine, it's essential to Celine's character. You really can't know what this character is about unless you see her in those moments in which that erotic aspect of herself is being expressed. I won't go into details here. I'll leave that up to the reader. But whenever you put in something which is explicitly erotic, you always run the risk that it's going to be seen in the wrong way. And what I try to accomplish here is to make sure that the reader sees Celine more deeply, not just for titillation purposes, but to really understand the core of who she is. I want them to enjoy the story. It's a very propulsive story that takes place over 2 continents, here in the Bay Area, New York City, and in Europe, in Barcelona, in Paris, in Switzerland. So it's a propulsive story that has a plot that carries the reader along. So I certainly want them to enjoy that. I want them to enjoy the characterizations of these 3 major characters and some of the minor characters. But more importantly, I want them to understand what the basic theme of the book is, which is that no matter how sophisticated we are, no matter how worldly we think we are, we're still vulnerable human beings, and we can still be taken in by the wrong people if we allow that to happen. And that's really the message of the book is, and it is probably of almost every femme fatale story that's ever been written, which is watch out, beware, these people are dangerous, and if you're vulnerable, you can be taken in. I think Celine is an interesting character, and I have very much considered writing a sequel, and I very well might. Now, the fact is, I was so fascinated by the character that I wrote a screenplay for the book, and that is one way of doing a sequel, but I may very well in the future decide that these characters are so compelling to me, at least, and hopefully to the readers. And we're going to see what readers actually say. If they feel the same way, then that will add some weight to actually producing a sequel for the book. It's interesting. Writers have to be able to do, especially a writer of a novel, has to be able to do a couple of things. One is what I would call general description. In other words, if you're in a place, how do you, with a few carefully chosen brushstrokes, describe it? The other thing is dialogue. Do you get the dialogue right? And I think most writers would say that the most difficult thing they do is writing dialogue. And that's because you only hear dialogue from yourself and from people you know. Dialogue for characters whom you've just created or from your imagination, how do you know that that's right? And I think that is the most difficult thing. It's certainly the thing I find most difficult. And when I was writing Celine, I tried very hard to put myself into that person's head so that when they spoke and when the other character spoke, it sounded real. I wrote my first story when I was in junior high school. It was about a rocket ship ride where the problem with the rocket was that there were mice eating up the electronics, and so it went out of control. And that was sort of the first moment I sort of knew that I wanted to write. And I've written my whole life, not novels, but short stories and essays. So it's always been a theme of my entire life to write. And finally, at this point, I had the inspiration and the time to write a novel. Hopefully it will not be my last. I consider myself a writer, and I think it's something that people either know that they are or want to do. And you know it when you sit down on a keyboard and the words come out. That's the mark of whether you are a writer or not. Celine will hopefully make her appearance in social media. She's going to be, I wanted her to be an iconic character. Someone, when you read the book, I want the reader to feel that this is a person that they're interested in, and it takes on a certain larger than life dimension. And as you say, when the reader gets to the end of the book, I think they'll understand why I think that could happen, the effect that she has on people.